Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's parsha is V'etchanan. The Torah proclaims that its laws are our wisdom and understanding in the sight of the nations. The nations of the world will say of the Israelites that this is a wise and understanding people. We explore the traditional commentaries, and then we discover Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner, born at the end of the 19th century and a radical thinker and early religious Zionist. Based on this verse, he taught that if our Torah does not match the most enlightened moral, ethical, cultural, and aesthetic standards of the day, it and we need to evolve. So join us for What They Say About Us Actually Matters. Well, welcome, Rabbi. Another week of Madlik Disruptive Torah.
And we should remember Shabbat Nachamu. We remember your father, who was we talk about disruptive Torah, and we talk about all these kind of forward thinking ideas. He really taught everybody what it meant to be forward thinking and to appreciate Jewish history, but to also appreciate what the Jewish future could be about. So we remember him this Shabbos on the special Shabbos, and you already invited everybody to Westport, to Beit Chaverim. If you're going to be in the Westport area, have a l'chaim and have a kiddush with Geoffrey in memory of his father.
Fantastic. I hope to see you all there. So this is a kind of exciting to me. You just did a shout out to Beit Chaverim. I am going to give a shout out to 2015, where I went to my first week-long learning session. I think there was an executive week at Hadar, and I heard Ethan Tucker talk about this Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner, who we're going to be introduced to. So isn't it wonderful when we have institutions, peoples, and opportunity just to thank for influencing us and enlightening us and making our lives that much richer. So here we are. We're in Deuteronomy 4:5-7, and it says, "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, chukim umishpatim, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that you shall act accordingly in the land whether you go to possess it." This is Moses talking. They're about to go into the promised land. Verse 6, "Keep them, therefore, and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations. Ki hi chamatchem uvinatchem le'enei ha'amim. And these nations shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great that God's so near to them as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for?" So, it would be a normal verse, encouraging us to keep the commandments, but it adds something that actually is surprising, radical, and fairly unique. That not only are the laws good, not only do you have to keep them because you were commanded them and God is great and all that good stuff, but all of a sudden, out of the blue, it talks about what the world, what the umot ha'olam, the nations of the world will say. And lo and behold, it says they will look upon you. And of course, in the beginning I said chukim umishpatim. Chukim we always have said are maybe laws that we don't really understand that well. Mishpatim are laws that we do. But when it talks about this is your wisdom amongst the nation, there it says asher yishma'un et kol hachukim ha'eleh. So all of these laws that are chukim, all of a sudden the nations will look upon them. So clearly this is is a verse that stands out and requires us almost to explain. Rabbi, you said you're already in Connecticut. You were in the pool today, and you were discussing this with your family. What kind of discussions did you have?
Well,
What does this mean to
what
you?
we have. I mean, it's a what it is it's a surprising pasuk, and I think you made that point. You wouldn't have expected it. Like, you don't need it, but somehow kihi chachmatchem ubinatchem le'einei ha'amim. Ve'amru rak am chachon v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh. It matters what they say about us, right? They need to say that we're a smart people. And navon, it's interesting what the difference between the word chacham and navon is. I think chacham means you're smart. Navon means you understand things, right? It's kind of it's a more sophisticated level of intelligence.
We always know havin is lavin davar
Right,
mitoch davar,
right.
bina. Women are
Bina,
considered to have more
right,
bina than men.
right,
But
right.
absolutely, I love that. So we're going to go through some of the standard commentaries first before we get to my buddy Moshe Shmuel Glasner. So the Sephorno says, the observance of the laws of the Torah is your true wisdom and will enable you to resist the laws and challenges by the heretics. Ba teshevu la'apikoros umaftim shechalim. So all of a sudden, this becomes a verse that enters into the world of polemics. All of a sudden, for the first time, it's not like we're fighting nations, we're conquering nations. Now we're engaged through this verse for the first time in the Torah in discourse and possibly, as I said, polemics, but justification of who we are. I think the Sephorno kind of sets the stage for where a lot of the traditional commentaries go. The Malbim talks about, and he focuses definitely on the fact that it's emphasizing the chukim. It's emphasizing the laws that don't necessarily have a rational reason. And he says, don't think this is because it's the opposite. The fact that these laws are kind of strange, that they're a kind of different, that is not a negative, it's a positive. Because every nation has laws and customs that are rational, that their wise men established. Only we have the weird stuff. So, I mean, it's fascinating how they're all grappling with trying to understand what exactly the polemic is. But, I said it facetiously, but it means that we have rules that are above logic, that cannot be necessarily defined by pure logic. And in and of itself, according to the Malbim, that becomes something that people admire, that the nations of the world look to. But again, he's trying to struggle to understand what is the argument here. Why would the nations of the world look at the red heifer law and the laws of kashrut and all of the laws that seemingly don't have a logical explanation? The Chatam Sofer, and he is going to be part of our conversation because Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner, I believe, was his great-grandson.
Something like that, right.
Something like that. And he says that really the true value of these laws are esoteric. They're hidden. They're nista. But the nigla, that which is available for all to see, even that inspires the respect of the nations. It's almost as though he's coming from a perspective of, we don't really need their recognition. We don't need their likes on social media. But this verse is saying that even still, even though the truth is much deeper, but even on the surface of it, they find something to admire.
Now, you do understand, let's just pause for a second on that Chatam Sofer. That's interesting. You see, it bothered him that we care about what the non-Jews think about us. That bothered him. He didn't like that. So he needed to say that's not what it means. Even though, of course, we don't care what they say about us, nevertheless, there's an explanation. But it's just interesting, the kind of perspective. And he lives around in the early 1800s. So it's already the modern period. They're already interacting with non-Jews. They already feel the tension of, already by, let me just say it like this. By the beginning of the 1800s, the Jews were already going to university with non-Jews, which means that it mattered what they thought about us, what we thought about them. So he needs to say that's not really what we're talking about.
So there's the Khatam Sofer and the Katav Sofer. I have a friend named David Sofer who may or may not be listening. Once in a while, he sends me a note. I heard the Matlik podcast.
That's funny.
They were the poster children. This duo were the poster children of those who really fought what is called the Haskalah. They fought the Enlightenment. They fought reform. They were conservative with a capital C. And so I think what you just said is absolutely spot on, that you can feel almost the resentment that we even need to explain, because in a sense that dilutes who we are. We are who we are because we are, and we don't need to explain. But
right.
Icing on the cake, even so, the non-Jews will look at us and say it is our wisdom. The Rabbeinu Bechaya takes a whole different perspective. I would like to say that he takes the Nobel Prize argument. He says that this relates to the fact that in the Torah there is science. He refers to healing. We all know Maimonides was a great doctor. He says that the Torah observance is preventive medicine. Basically, he's saying what I think Rabbi Riskin once said that his grandmother told him that if you eat kosher, you'll be healthier and stronger. And he believed that up until the point where at Yeshiva University, he was on the debate team, and they went to debate West Point. And the 6'5" guy who shook his hand before the debate, as he shook his hand, little Shlomo Riskin was lifted from the ground. And he said to himself, I don't know about this healthier, more robust business. But there definitely was a very strong tradition that if you follow our rules, it's better for you. It's physically healthier. Many people associate kosher with healthy food, no extra ingredients. This is a tradition. And again, it was tagged on to this verse. And it comes actually from the Talmud in Shabbat 75a, where they focus not so much on healing, but they focus on calculating astronomical seasons. And we did a podcast on this once, Rabbi, because Judaism is based on a lunar calendar, and because it is critical that our holidays fall within their season, namely that Passover comes in the spring, we had to create rather impressive, I would say, understandings of both the solar calendar and the lunar calendar so that we could fix them from time to time, calibrate them, if you will. The Muslim calendar doesn't calibrate.
The word is synchronize them.
Amazing.
Right?
But to do that, you had to understand both this. You got to understand the planets and the moon and the sun. And so here the Talmud looked already that long ago and said, maybe, unlike what maybe the Rabbeinu Bechaya was saying, but maybe because we as a people have created kind of, I would say, barriers in front of ourselves. we have become very curious and very inventive. I mean, I think there's a whole chapter in Startup Nation that because of the challenge that we have, maybe people attribute culinary arts to Israelis because they had to figure out how to make this with a non milk substance or something. But that's what this argument is, that the constraints, I look at it almost like a sonnet, that we had to write those 16 lines, and that forced us to innovate. Fascinating, isn't it?
It's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it's a great explanation. Yeah, that's good. That's a really good explanation. And it's interesting, Rabbeinu Bachaya, he lives in Spain. You know, all these things, the minute that you talk about interaction with the outside world, you have to think about where these people came from. Rabbeinu Bachaya comes from Spain. And Spain in the 1300s, there was tremendous interaction between the Jews and the non-Jews, right? We know the Abarbanel was a politician. He worked for the king. There was a lot of interaction. So, this is a real issue for these people.
So now we get to my buddy Shadal, Shmuel David Letzado. We haven't quoted him. We haven't studied with him for a while.
No, it isn't. But he's also interesting because he comes from Padua. He comes from Italy, and they're also there. There's a lot of interaction with the non-Jews. Padua has a very important medical school. So he was involved in all of this.
So he is at the cusp of higher biblical criticism. He's at the cusp of people who are saying you can't understand Judaism unless you understand Hammurabi's Code, Esnuna Code, unless you understand the culture and the laws out of which it organically grew, that you have to study other languages, that the Israelite religion is not all that unique. In fact, to understand it, you need to be a scholar in all of these other cultures and law systems. What he takes from this verse is he said, if, in fact, the Israelite religion came out of the milieu of the ancient Near East, why are the non-Jews saying, Ki hi chachmatchem? Boy, this is different. He is making an argument that this is proof solid that the Israelite religion was a paradigm shift, that in a sense it came out of nowhere. He writes, if the Jewish people had stolen it from the Egyptians, like our buddy Freud says, there was a religion that worshipped the sun. It was a monotheistic religion in Egypt. Why would they say that? So everybody that we're looking at heretofore is really focused on the polemical aspect of this verse, and they're all, as you say, coming out of their own context of where they are in the history of ideas and in the development of the Jewish people, with whether it's in Spain or Cordova or wherever. It really is a wonderful Warsaw test to see as much about our commentaries and commentators as it is about the pasuk itself.
This Shadal is actually remarkable because, again, it's clearly against the backdrop of people who believed that Judaism came from somewhere else. And he felt that this was the place that he needed to defend Judaism as, like you said, being a paradigm shift.
So now we're going to make our own paradigm shift. Now we're going to go in another direction. And the other direction is this is less polemical and more an insight into the nature of the Israelite, the Jewish religion. So to do that, we have to quote another verse that comes up in our Parsha, and it is 6:24. Then God commanded us to observe all these laws, to revere our God for our lasting good and for our survival, as is now the case. Letov lanu kol hayamim. Here is a sense that in fact what this is saying is stop with the polemics already. This is telling us something intrinsically powerful about our religion. They are really seeing within our religion, our way of living, something that is beautiful, because living the life of the Torah is not for some other world. It's not for some cosmic reality. It is for a better life that anyone on the planet can realize. Another verse that would be brought in here from wisdom literature, it shouldn't really be talking about Torah, but it is universally used to talk about Torah, is Proverbs 3:17. Darcheha darchei noam v'chol netivotecha shalom. Her ways are pleasant and all her paths are peaceful. She is a tree of life. Eitz chayim hi lemachazikim bo v'tomcheha mu'ushar. Whoever holds her is happy. So here is another perspective. This isn't about them, it's about us. And truly, what God is saying is that the law that I've given you, the commandments, the customs that I've given you, make you a better people, and you are better for it. I think this is a change. If you look at Maimonides, the great rationalist, who believed in something called Ta'amei HaMitzvot, that every commandment has a reason. You know, we talk about chukim as things that have no logic. I don't think that would sit well with Maimonides. He absolutely believed that what this verse is saying, that if you truly understand the Torah, you will see in it, I wouldn't say a superior, but certainly an amazing way of life. And he criticizes people. He doesn't mention the Malbim because the Malbim was after him. But he criticizes those who kind of say that the laws are, for the masses, and that we should... the argument that he brings both here and in the Guide for the Perplexed is actually fascinating. It's the guide. It says that these could not be human laws because no human would come up with this stuff. And Maimonides says you are not raising the rabbis and raising the Torah. You are degrading it when you say that. You say that no man would create these laws, but God would. So he was against the heebie-jeebies. He was against the hidden meanings. And
he was, the fancy term they use is that the Rambam was a rationalist. Right? Everything had to make sense. Even God's role in the Torah had to be logical in the Rambam's mind.
And that's his argument. And for those of us who study the Torah and come up against something that is a challenge to our reason, what we try to do is try to contextualize, we try to understand, but basically, and I am guilty as charged, we believe that the Torah is an amazing document, that the Israelite revolution was an amazing revolution. It might be in a particular time, and then we follow the rabbis, and I'm a big fan of the rabbis, as you know, and we'll say how they adopted it and changed it and so forth. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't just rule it out as something that's strange and that makes it holy, or it's beyond our understanding and that must make it holy. So in a sense, I guess you and I are kind of rationalists.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, and that's not surprising because, the world of education is the world of rationalists. The Rambam was so surprising because it wasn't really a world of education. Most people were not educated. So the Rambam came as a rationalist, and that was really surprising to people.
Okay. So now, as promised, we are going to take a left turn. Comes along Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner.
And tell us his biography.
So, he passed away, I believe, in 1923, 22. He was born, obviously, in the 1800s.
In Hungary.
Was in Hungary. As I said, he was a relation, a grandson, a great-grandson of the Ktav Sofer. He called himself the Dor Revi'i. And in a sense, that meant that he was the fourth generation of these luminaries. But it also resonated with the fact that Abraham was told that the Jews would go down to Egypt and the fourth generation would go into the land. Yes, he was a Zionist also. And there's a picture in the source sheets, and you will look at him, and he looks as Haredi come. So he had both the provenance and the learning, but he was absolutely a radical thinker. I think he made Aliyah to Israel 2 years before he passed away. It was right after World War I was over, and as the crowds gathered at the train station, he said, "Leave as you can and when you can, because if you wait too long, you will want to leave and not be able to leave." He saw everything coming. As we're going to see in a second, he also was an amazing fan of the Enlightenment, of the Heicha culture of Europe, of human rights, and of everything that was happening. And this is in total counter-distinction to his grandfather and great-grandfather. What do you have to add, Rabbi?
No, I'm listening to you because you know more about him than I do.
So had you heard about him before? Have you been?
I know the name, yeah, but I don't really know about him. That's why I was excited to read this time.
Great. So as I said, I was introduced to him at an executive seminar by Ethan Tucker at Hadar. And basically, what he says, he has a book, a commentary on the tractate of Chulin, and in it he has a lengthy introduction. And so you will know, Rabbi, that in addition to my Haggadah collections, I have an original of his commentary of the Dor Revi'i on Chulin in my collection, and there are pictures in the show notes. But in any case, he turns this pasuk almost onto its head. And he says that anything that violates the norms of enlightened human culture cannot be permitted to us, a holy nation. Can there be anything forbidden to them but permitted to us? The Torah says that the nations are supposed to say, "What a great nation with such just laws and statutes." But if they are on a higher level than we in the laws and norms, they will say about us, "What a foolish and disgusting nation." So what he does in the words of Ethan Tucker is he turns a description into a prescription. That the fact that we are told that the world will say about us that looking at us we are wise is not a description, it is a prescription. It means that we have to work. We have to make sure that we are always ahead of the curve, that we in fact have rules and regulations that are equal, if not more moral, more aesthetically pleasing, more enlightened than the rest of the world. And this turns everything unto its head. He goes on to say, "I say that anything that is revolting to enlightened Gentiles is forbidden to us, not just because of Chilul Hashem, but because of the command to be holy." In a sense, he's almost saying that we let culture, as it evolves,
defines what morality is.
It's radical.
It's really radical. It's so surprising. Everybody moved in the other direction, like we saw in the Chatam Sofer, and everyone moved in the other direction. And he's willing to say that society defines what morality is.
So this is an excerpt, and in the source sheets you will find links to Ethan Tucker's study of this, and I suggest that you all take a look. But he writes, one need not dig too much deeper to hear that the text here is necessarily making just a descriptive claim here, but a prescriptive one as well. The Torah and its mitzvot are supposed to evoke the sort of admiration from outsiders. If it does not, something is wrong. It is not a far leap from here to suggest that interpretations and applications of the Torah that evoke revulsion from the external observers are potentially suspect and in need of deeper thought and reevaluation. Rabbi, he's going even further. Not only are we supposed to keep up with the times, but if we have stuff that is criticized on these higher enlightened ideals, we should be questioning our own commandments.
That's remarkable. I mean, I don't know, good or bad, but that's remarkable.
It doesn't matter if humanity considered a certain action to be neutral for most of its history. If all enlightened, decent, intelligent people come to abhor that action, then Torah implicitly tells us that Jews must abhor it as well. So here Tucker adds something else. This is not static. This is dynamic, meaning to say that you could, and I'll just take an example of shchita, you could make a case that in its day, the ritual slaughter of the Jews of animals was the most humane way of killing an animal. But you could make a case, and that we were ahead of the world, that we were looking at package labels 1,000 years before the world started to say it's important what you eat. That we were distinguishing between types of food 1,000, 2,000 years before the world discovered food that has lactose in it, food that is whatever. So yes, we were in the day, we were ahead of the curve. But what he's saying is that this is dynamic, that we have to keep ahead of the curve, and we have to constantly be looking at our rules.
Now, that might be the most interesting thing of all. The idea that Judaism needs to be dynamic is a very revolutionary idea, right? The idea usually is that Judaism is where it is, and we're solid where we are. The idea that we need to always be responding to the culture around us, that we need to be dynamic, is very, very surprising.
So we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to have to talk like a New Yorker rabbi, even though we're in Connecticut. Basically, what he in his thing, he brings two examples that he wants to prove his point. He says you're not allowed to wear bigdei isha, women's clothing, but if you're sleeping in bed naked and a fire breaks out, do you just run out naked, or do you borrow the house robe of your wife? You are stranded on the top of a mountain. Your plane crashes. There are corpses there. You are starving. You see pigs walking by. Do you eat the pig, which is forbidden by the Torah, or do you become a cannibal and eat human flesh, which is not forbidden by the Torah? And he brings these two examples as examples to show, in a sense, there's a higher authority, that we all know that, and he uses the fact that Genesis begins with Adam and Eve. There's first our humanity, and then becomes the Torah, and the Torah is built upon that humanity. An example that Ethan Tucker does not bring, that I think ties it all together, is the example he brings about a house that is burning on Shabbat. are you allowed to extinguish the flames? And he says that those commentaries that say that you can extinguish the flames because the flames might spread and destroy non-Jewish homes, and therefore it'll be a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's names, are absolutely crazy. Because as a Zionist, he says, what happens when we live in Tel Aviv? Are we going to let the whole city burn down? And he brings a proof text from a Gemara that says that you have to serve God with all your heart, soul, and all your material needs. And he says there are some people that value their life more than anything, and there are some people that value their belongings more than everything. And from this, he says that you can save your house because your belongings are going to be destroyed. And he says, and if you have constant poverty for all your days, there is an unending torment. It's much harsher than taking a life. He almost sounds like those people who argue that abortion is okay because it's a rodef, because you can't take a 17-year-old girl's life away from her. I mean, he is so far into the future in terms of understanding, I would say, the bigger picture. But it is absolutely fascinating. And of course, as Tucker raises, it raises all sorts of questions about, how do we deal when the world thinks differently about sexual identity? Right. How do we deal when the world thinks differently about circumcision? This is an introduction to the thought of this rabbi, but I think it shows us that we live, in his mind, living in Israel was a time where he felt that the oral law should never have been written down because it calcified. And he felt that when we get to Israel, it can be opened up again, and we can try to update it to these moral codes. And that's just fascinating. It's a kind of a breath of fresh air from the early 1900s.
From a Hungarian rabbi, from the last place you would expect it. That's amazing. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for that. This was a great topic. That was an amazing, revolutionary kind of idea. And I promise you we will discuss it again tomorrow night around the Shabbat table. Enjoy your Shabbat. Enjoy your maftir. Everybody in Westport is very lucky this Shabbat, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Shabbat Shalom. See you all next week. Shabbat Shalom.